Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Script Monkey. Today, in this video, we're going to build on the app we started last time. So last time we were able to get a React app up and loaded, get our workspace up and loaded, and get a website going. Pretty meager website, just says howdy, not much there. But today, so we're going to add the ability to use state. We're going to talk about use state, what that is. And we're going to be able to pass props between components. So we're going to build multiple components and pass data from one component to another. So we're going to do another very classic React example together. We're going to add some HTML here, some JSX HTML. We are going to add a button that when you click it, it's going to increase. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this arrow function here. Right now it's just in, out. This is what's being returned. This JSX div says howdy. I'm going to add some code in here. So we're going to add some code block bracket braces. And then since I'm adding the braces, I need to tell it what to return. And when you're typing this, you'll notice, errors popping up down here, and it's reevaluating whenever you stop typing, and you'll see your web page, your web app over here. It'll update as you go. And so I broke it temporarily, but then I fixed it, and so it's back to load it again. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a few things here. Let's make it, add a couple HTML elements, some more JSX. And JSX and HTML are very similar. There's a few differences that as we get to them, I'll show you the differences. But today it's going to be pretty much as if you're writing HTML. So I can write a H1 tag and I can say the amazing counter. All right, but whenever I do this, there's a little bit of a difference. I have to, in a React app, you have to have one parent container when you send things as a return. And so right now I have two parents, right? I have a H1 and I have a div. And so I either need to wrap these in a parent component, so I could do a div like this. And so that fixed my errors down here in the terminal, and I can come back to the page over here, the amazing counter, H1, and then a little div with howdy in it. So that's one way. The other way is there's a fragment tag where it's just nothing in it, just open, close. And so the difference is it would be one less div on your page. So either way is fine. This is a little simpler. If you look at the web page, it's the exact same, but if you go F12 and look at the actual HTML elements, you can see I've got that root div here. I've got my H1 tag and my div tag all together. Whenever the fragment doesn't show up, but if I did have a div, I would have a div wrapping these two underneath the root div. So it's a little cleaner to not put divs everywhere. You just put these fragments. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add, maybe this will be my counter. So I'll just put counter in there for now. Maybe it'll be a P tag instead of a div. That makes more sense, right? And then I want to add a button. So just a HTML button, and that says, click me. Exclamations everywhere today. So click me. Let's look at it again. There it is, click me. So I want the counter to be a number. Every time I click, I want the counter to go up and down, or go up in this case. So I want to increase it by 1. So in order to put JavaScript inside JSX here, we use curly braces. So I need to make a variable, and I need to put curly braces in here. And so I'll show you the wrong way to do it. You don't want to do it this way. I'm gonna eventually we'll use state to do this the correct way, but I'm just gonna do a variable to show you kind of what we're thinking here. So if I say let count equals 0. And in here, I have a count, right? This is good so far, good so far. So you see how I put the JavaScript variable count, I put it in the paragraph tag here. If you look back at the screen, there it is, 0. Okay. Now, what if I say on click, because the button, you have an on click event. I can say same thing, curly braces, but we want to increase the count, right? So whenever it's clicked, anytime it's clicked, I'll do a little arrow function in here, in line, and we'll do count plus plus and see what happens. This is not the right way. You don't do this. But this is what you might think, and you'd be wrong, right? I'm wrong right now. This is not the way to do it. So let's see what happens now. So it still loads, it's still everything, but if I click, nothing's happening. So I'm clicking, I'm trying to change that counter, it's not going. That's because I've got to use state to do this. I can't do it this way. It's refreshing, and the count is continually getting zeroed every time it comes through. It's not increasing. And so if I instead use state, we'll get this to work. So I'm going to add useState, import it from React. You can see here, this was the default export, but then I have a second export from React, useState, so I'm naming that one. And so instead of declaring count as a number variable like this, I want to do a const count, and then you get set count. So it's like an array, right? You have an array. The first one is a variable, and the second one is how to change the variable. So any change that I want count to occur, I have to send into set count. I have to use set count to change count. And then over here, I need to use state. And this value right here is the initialization, just like we did it before, right? Just with like the let count equals 0, I'm using state and I'm saying start at 0. You can start at an empty string. You can start at an actual value if you want, an empty array, an empty object, all sorts of things you can initialize there. Where this makes most sense to start at 0 though, because we're counting. Every time it's clicked, we want to count up. But this won't fly right down here. We can't directly change the variable count when we're doing useState. We couldn't change it anyway if we weren't using useState, but now especially we can't change it directly. We have to use set count. So set count, and we have to put in what we want count to be next, right? And so we wanted to increase every time, so it doesn't make sense to put 1 in here and say, because it would just go to 1 when you clicked, and that's all it would ever do. I need to do count plus 1. So every click is going to give me a plus 1 on the count. All right, so let's try it. See what happens. So click me now. There it goes. Increasing. As many times as you click, now you can make that clicker game you've always wanted to make. HTML clicker game. Boom, boom, boom. All right. But this isn't the greatest of, this isn't very reusable. I'd have to do a lot of, it's pretty simple still, but if I wanted a second button, or if I wanted maybe a minus button or a +5 button, this isn't the greatest way to do things all in the app.js. So what we want to do is we want to split this up a little bit. All right, we want to make some new components, and we want to import components, and we want to pass props. This count, we're going to pass it here and there. So what we'll do is we'll do a new folder. So new folder, I'm going to call it components. And I'll do a new file, and this will be our counter.js. And then maybe we'll have a new file, button.js, button.js. And so in this case, let's make counter, he's going to be in charge of the count, right? And then the button, that's just going to be a button. So let's make the button first. So all I'm going to do is, well, I'll copy this whole thing. Makes it easier, right? So I'm going to copy this whole thing. For the button, we're not going to need useState. We're not going to need the count. It's going to be called button, so I'm going to rename this to button. I don't need all this business. Gone. All right, so down here on the button right here, we need a few things. We need to pass in some props, some properties. So you could pass it in like props, just say props. That means I can remove these parentheses up here, and I could say on click props dot click handler. And so on click, I want to run the function called props.clickhandler. And then what does the button say? Well, if I have a button, it's not always going to say click me, right? Sometimes I want it to say different things. Maybe a submit or send me an email, I don't know, something. And so we'll make this a message. So instead of click me, we're going to do props.message. Okay, so that means we need to send both of those properties, click handler and message, down to this button here. And since I don't have any other code in here, I can get rid of a lot of these things. I can say get rid of return, because we're back to just a bare basic arrow function. And so in is props. This is our button. In is props, and then out is a button with a click handler and a props.message. All right. So now what I can do is back here, whenever I call the button, well, I don't want to call that button anymore. I want to call my new React button. So I want button. I need to wrap it in curly braces from, and I love VS Code. It kind of gives you help here trying to find stuff. Components, yes. Button, yes. Boom. All right, so now down here, I don't want that button. I want this button. And then instead of this needs to be click handler, right? Because that's what I called it over there. And then instead of this business, I need a self-closing tag because it's React. And I need to say message equals click me. Make that a string. All right. Now let's see what happens. Click me, same thing. We just split it up, right? It's all right. It's okay. We'll keep going. What we can do is we can remove this count out of here. This is props, by the way, right? This is props. We're sending click handler in to the button, and then down here on the button, we're using those props down here. It's just an object. So what you could do, you could actually deconstruct this object if you wanted. Maybe it makes it a little more readable, a little easier to type, is if I did some curly braces in here, wrapped it in parentheses, and instead of saying props, maybe I do click handler and message, right? And so then on click, I just do click handler, and on the message, I just do message. Now we've got our button, we've got our props coming in, deconstructed, and then we have our HTML JSX button on click equals click handler, and then the message in there. So is it working? It is. It's still working. Great. So now let's move the count. Move the count into counter. All right. So in this example, what we want to do is maybe we want let's do this. We want counter to own the count. We don't necessarily want it in app. So let's import counter from components counter. We want this to be down in counter. All right, so let's copy all this and just delete it out, what we don't need. So I don't need buttons, I don't need counter right now. useState, sure. We want this to be counter. That's all good. All right, something like this, maybe. So app doesn't really need to know about the button or anything like that. It just needs to know about the counter. And so what we can do is we can make the button part of counter. So we can import button here. We'll clean all the other stuff up from button. Boom. Yep. Maybe we pull click handler out so it looks a little better, right? Const, we can read it all on the same screen. Const click handler is going to be equal to an arrow function. And it's going to do the exact same job as right here. So just set count to +1. And then down here, click handler is equal to click handler. All right. And then back here, maybe counter's what we want. So counter. And it doesn't need any of this stuff. We don't need that guy. We don't need useState anymore here. We don't need button here because the button's part of the counter. We don't need button here. So it's all it's doing is doing the header and the counter. All right. And I mean, we could have the button here, and it comes up and it goes down to the counter, but you know, it's definitely an art versus a science, and at some point where do you want to make your slices? How do you want to be reusable? This button, right? This button's very reusable. I can use it pretty much anywhere. It just has an on click, has a message. I mean, it's a simple button. Doesn't look great right now. We'll get into styling our components, styled components later. But for now, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So click me, it's going up. Great. Let's add something. Let's add some more buttons. So we're going to add maybe some up and down buttons, right? So let's come back into counter. Here's our button handler. And we want to add, maybe instead of click me, maybe this is a +1 button. And maybe we have a -1 button. All right. And maybe before this we have a -10 button. Oop. There we go. -10. This can be a +10. So we have all sorts of buttons going on. But they're all going to do the same thing. They're all using the same click handler right now. So we need to figure out, what do we want to do? How do we want to when you click, how do we want to raise and lower the count? All right, so maybe we can let's add. Maybe we can do it right in the function, right? So in the click handler, maybe we do a little arrow function here, and we pass in the value -10. And so here we do the same thing, but this time we pass in -1. All right, and I'll just copy and paste this. Paste that, and so this will be +1 and +10. And so now up here in our click handler, we'll have we'll just have value. And so the set count will be added to value, right? Let's see if that works. So here we go. We've got all our buttons lined up in a row. We do +1, we do +10, -1, -10. It's working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. All right, so let's take a look one more time. What do we do? We have, last time we just had a simple app that did one div that said howdy, and now we added a header. We added a counter component. The counter component, his job is to keep track of state. So we're doing useState. We have the count as a variable and then the set count as the way to change that variable. We have down here our click handler, and our click handler, we're using the same click handler, but we're passing in different values on different buttons. So we're using the same button over and over again, the same little component, but we're doing a different function every time, a different message. And it comes back up and it says, it adds the value, whatever value is passed in. I don't need this parentheses. And really, I don't need these guys here. I can just do this. Still works great. All right, so we can really simplify things down. And then if we have the button, we could use this everywhere. This is our button from now on. Maybe we'll change it a little bit, but this works. This is our good button. All right, so one last look. The amazing counter. You put anything you want in here, any buttons you want. Maybe, like I said, you can make a clicker game. See how high you can get, right? All right, thanks for joining me. This is Script Monkey. We'll see you next time.